The first cases appeared in January 1348. A trading ship from the east docked at the quay, and within days, dock workers who had unloaded its cargo began to collapse. Swellings appeared in their groins and armpits, hard, dark lumps the size of eggs that turned black as they grew. Fever followed, then delirium, then death. The sick vomited blood, their skin darkened with hemorrhages beneath the surface. The smell from the dying was so foul that even the physicians, those who had not already fled, could barely stand to approach. By February, it had spread beyond the docks. By March, it was in every parish. By summer, Venice was dying at a rate of 600 people per day. The dead were loaded onto gondolas and rowed to burial islands in the outer lagoon. When the burial islands filled up, bodies were dumped into mass graves dug into the mudflats. When the gravediggers themselves died, corpses floated in the canals until the tide carried them out. Churches held services for congregations that shrank visibly from one Sunday to the next. Workshops closed, markets emptied, the arsenal fell silent. The physicians who remained wore long robes soaked in wax and carried wooden canes to examine patients without touching them. Some pressed bundles of dried herbs and flowers to their faces, believing that the corruption traveled through foul air. Priests gave last rites through closed doors or shouted absolution from the street below a dying man's window. In the parishes of Dorsoduro Duro and Cannaregio, entire families were found dead together in their beds, undiscovered for days because no neighbor dared to knock. The living walked through streets that felt emptied not just of people, but of sound. No market cries, no oar strokes, no hammering from the arsenal. The only constant noise was the bells, ringing for the dead so continuously that the city council eventually ordered them stopped, fearing the sound itself was driving the survivors mad. Venice had been made rich by its ships. The same ships brought the plague. By the time it receded in 1349, the city had lost roughly 60% of its population, 70,000 dead or more. But Venice did something that almost no other city in Europe did. It responded with bureaucracy. In the midst of the dying, the city council appointed a crisis committee, 3 noblemen given emergency authority to manage the disaster. They ordered the streets cleaned. They prohibited the sale of contaminated goods. They organized the removal of bodies from homes and canals. And when the plague returned, because it always returned in waves for the next 3 centuries, Venice refined its response into something systematic. Ships arriving from suspect ports were required to anchor offshore and wait. The waiting period was originally 30 days, a trentina. Later, it was extended to 40, a quarantina. The word quarantine entered the languages of Europe from this lagoon. In 1423, the government established a permanent plague hospital on an island, the Lazaretto Vecchio. The sick were taken there by force if necessary, isolated from the city. A second island, the Lazaretto Nuovo, was designated for ships and passengers undergoing their 40-day wait. Cargo was unloaded, fumigated with smoke, and aired in open warehouses before being allowed into the city. It was brutal. Families were separated. The islands smelled of vinegar, burning herbs, and death. But it worked. Not perfectly, not every time, but well enough that Venice survived plague after plague, while other cities simply emptied and waited for God to decide. The plague was not the only thing trying to kill Venice in the 14th century. Marin Faliero was elected Doge in 1354. He was 76 years old, a decorated military commander, and he had been insulted. A young nobleman named Michele Stano had scrawled an obscene message about the Doge's wife on the wall of the ducal palace. When Stano was caught, the punishment was light, a brief exile, barely a slap. Faliero was enraged, not at Stano alone, but at the closed circle of noble families who treated the Doge as a puppet and the Republic as their private property. He began to plot. His allies were not fellow nobles, but commoners, arsenaliti, fishermen, craftsmen who resented the aristocratic monopoly on power. The plan was to seal the entrances to the Piazza San Marco, murder the leading nobles, and declare Faliero ruler of Venice. The plan leaked. One of the conspirators told a friend. The friend told a senator. The senator told the Council of Ten. On the night of April 15, 1355, Faliero was arrested in his own palace. The trial lasted less than a day. He was found guilty of treason. The next morning, he was led to the top of the stone staircase at the entrance of the Doge's palace, the very staircase where he had taken his oath of office, and beheaded. His blood ran down the steps where he had stood in ducal robes and sworn to serve the state. Afterward, the council ordered his portrait removed from the Great Council Hall. In its place, they hung a black cloth. Painted on it, in white letters, Hic est locus Marini Faliero, decapitatis pro criminibus. This is the place of Marine Faliero, beheaded for his crimes. Every Doge who entered the hall after Faliero had to look up and see it. 45 years before Faliero lost his head, another conspiracy had been stopped by one of the most unlikely heroes in Venetian history. On June 15, 1310, a nobleman named Baiamonte Chiepolo led an armed column through the Merceria toward the Piazza San Marco, banners flying, swords drawn. They never reached the piazza. As the column passed beneath a certain window, an old woman named Giustina Rossi dropped a heavy stone mortar from her windowsill. It struck the rebel standard-bearer square on the head. He fell. The banner fell with him. The column stumbled, confused, suddenly leaderless in a narrow street with no room to maneuver. The Doge's forces charged into the gap. Tiepolo's rebellion collapsed within the hour. The Republic rewarded Giustina Rossi in a way that was perfectly Venetian. Her rent was frozen at its current rate and could never be raised, not for her, not for anyone who lived in that apartment after her for as long as the Republic existed. The freeze lasted 487 years, until Napoleon dissolved the Republic in 1797. It was in the aftermath of Tiepolo's rebellion that the Council of Ten was created, originally temporary, later permanent, eventually the most feared institution in Venice. And then Venice faced the one threat that nearly ended everything. In 1379, the Republic of Genoa launched a massive assault. The Genoese fleet, allied with Hungary and Padua, smashed the Venetian navy at the Battle of Pola and then sailed into the Venetian lagoon itself, capturing Chioggia at the southern entrance, barely 25 kilometers from the Piazza San Marco. For the first time in its history, Venice could see enemy fires burning from its own bell towers. The Senate debated surrender. The treasury was nearly empty. The fleet was shattered. Then the people demanded one thing: release Vigor Pisani. Pisani was the admiral who had lost the Battle of Pola. He had been blamed for the defeat and thrown into prison. Now, with the enemy inside the lagoon, the citizens rioted and insisted he be freed. The government relented. Pisani walked out of his cell and onto the deck of a warship. What Pisani found was not a navy. It was the wreckage of one. Most of Venice's war galleys had been sunk or captured at Pola. What remained were merchant vessels, fishing boats, and a handful of armed galleys that had been held in reserve. He ordered every available ship fitted for combat, merchant cogs reinforced with planking, fishing boats armed with crossbowmen, barges loaded with stones. He recruited crews from the arsenal workers, from the fishermen of Chioggia's neighboring islands, from prisoners, from anyone who could hold an oar. The Venetian fleet that sailed out to face the Genoese was not a professional armada. It was a city that had emptied itself onto the water. His plan was desperate. Instead of attacking the Genoese fleet directly, he ordered heavy barges filled with stone sunk across the entrance channels to Chioggia harbor. The Genoese, who had sailed in to besiege Venice, suddenly found themselves besieged. Their ships could not get out. Their supplies could not get in. In January 1380, Carlo Zeno arrived from the eastern Mediterranean with a relief fleet. The trap closed. By June, the Genoese surrendered. After Chioggia, Genoa never challenged Venetian supremacy at sea again. The arsenal's hammers started up. The trade galleys sailed east. The Rialto filled with pepper and silk. But the city did not know that two things were already in motion at the edges of the world. One was rising in the east. The other was sailing south, around the bottom of Africa, looking for a new way to reach the same spices that had made Venice rich. And when those two forces converged, it would not matter how many ships the arsenal could build, or how many conspirators the Council of Ten could silence. The news reached Venice in the summer of 1453, carried by a merchant galley that had barely escaped the harbor. Constantinople had fallen. Sultan Mehmed II, 21 years old, had breached the Triple Walls and taken the city that had been the capital of the Christian East for over 1,000 years. The Venetian quarter in Constantinople, the warehouses, the docks, the fondaco, where generations of merchants had lived and traded, was gone. Some Venetians had fought on the walls, some had been killed. Those who escaped brought only what they could carry to their ships. In the Doge's palace, the reaction was not grief, it was calculation. Venice had done business with Constantinople for 7 centuries. The city was the hinge of the Eastern trade, the point where goods from the Silk Road passed into Venetian hands for distribution across Europe. That hinge now belonged to the Ottomans. The question was what the Sultan would charge for the privilege of continuing to use it. The answer, over the following decades, was everything. Throughout the second half of the 15th century, the map of the Eastern Mediterranean changed color. One by one, the Venetian outposts won during the Fourth Crusade began to fall.
Negroponte, the Venetian name for the island of Euboea, had been in Venetian hands for over 250 years. It was not a minor outpost. It was a fortified naval base, a supply depot for the entire Eastern Fleet, and a symbol of Venetian permanence in the Aegean. When Mehmed II brought his army and siege artillery to the island in the summer of 1470, the garrison held for weeks, expecting a relief fleet from Venice. The fleet came too late. When the walls were finally breached, the Ottoman troops poured in, and the Bailo, the Venetian governor, was captured alive. Mehmed ordered him sawn in half. The message reached Venice within weeks, and the Senate understood it clearly. The age of easy dominion was over. Ports along the Greek coast were taken or abandoned. The Peloponnese came under Ottoman pressure that never relented. Venice fought back. It spent fortunes on fortifications, hired mercenaries, built new galleys, and sent them east into a war that had no clear battles and no clear end, only a slow erosion of territory and profit. Each war was followed by a peace treaty, and each peace treaty cost more than the last. The Ottoman advance was a wound that bled slowly, but the killing blow came from a direction Venice never expected. In 1498, Vasco da Gama sailed around the southern tip of Africa and reached the port of Calicut on the southwest coast of India. He had found a sea route to the source of the spices.
Portuguese ships could now sail directly from Lisbon to India, load their holds with pepper and cinnamon and cloves, and return to Europe without touching a single port that Venice controlled. The route cut out every middleman, Arab, Egyptian, Venetian, and the savings were enormous. Venice understood the threat immediately. When the first reports reached the Rialto, the reaction was something close to panic. The city dispatched ambassadors to Egypt, urging the Mamluk Sultan to block Portuguese access to the Indian Ocean. It lobbied the Pope. It explored the possibility of digging a canal through the Isthmus of Suez, technically impossible in the 15th century, but the fact that Venice considered it shows how desperate the situation felt. None of it worked. The Portuguese established permanent trading posts along the coast of India, then in the Spice Islands. Year by year, more pepper entered Europe through Lisbon and less through Venice. The shift was not sudden, like a tide going out, so gradual that on any given day the water looked the same, but over a decade the harbor was visibly emptier. The Rialto did not close. Venice remained wealthy through the 16th century, still trading, still building, still producing the finest glass and the most beautiful paintings in Europe. But the engine that had driven its rise, the monopoly on the Eastern trade, was broken, and nothing could repair it. What happened to a city that was losing its reason to exist? It threw a party. The Venetian Carnival grew in the 16th and 17th centuries into a permanent state of mind. By the 18th century, the season lasted up to 6 months. For half the year, the citizens of Venice wore masks. The mask was called the bauta, a white face covering worn with a black cape and a 3-cornered hat. Behind it, a nobleman looked identical to a shopkeeper. A senator was indistinguishable from a servant. The mask erased identity, and with identity gone, the rules that governed Venetian society dissolved. In the casinos and ridotti that multiplied across the city, masked figures gambled, drank, conducted affairs, and spent money that the Republic increasingly did not have. Foreign visitors poured in, English lords on their grand tour, French diplomats, German princes, to participate in what had become the most famous spectacle in Europe. The Ridotto di San Moise, the most famous of Venice's state-licensed gambling houses, was a long, candle-lit hall where masked patrons sat at tables playing bassetta and faro from afternoon until dawn. Noblemen who had inherited palazzi worth fortunes lost them in a single evening. Senators who sat in the morning session of the Great Council deliberating the Republic's finances sat in the evening session of the Ridotto, throwing those finances across a green felt table. Foreign visitors described the room as utterly silent, except for the clicking of chips and the occasional sharp intake of breath.
hundreds of masked faces motionless, watching cards turn. The government took a cut from every table. It was taxing its own self-destruction, and it knew it, and it could not afford to stop.
The gold that had once flowed through the Rialto from the spice trade now flowed out through the gambling tables. The palazzi built with the profits of empire were mortgaged, sold, or left to decay. The arsenal gradually emptied. The galleys dwindled. Titian, Tintoretto, Veronese, and later Canaletto and Tiepolo filled the churches and palaces with masterworks, but the beauty was now the product, not the byproduct. The Council of Ten still met. The doges were still elected through the ancient 10-round process. The Bucentoro still sailed out on Ascension Day, and the doge still dropped a ring into the sea. But the rituals were becoming theater. And then, in the spring of 1797, the final guest arrived, uninvited, armed, and completely indifferent to the party he was about to end. In the spring of 1797, French armies were sweeping across northern Italy in a campaign against Austria. Venice, officially neutral, had no army capable of resisting either side. Napoleon had reasons to move against Venice. Venetian subjects on the mainland had attacked French soldiers in several incidents, most notably in Verona, where an uprising killed several hundred troops. Napoleon used these events as a pretext. On April 20th, he sent an ultimatum: disarm the fleet, release all political prisoners, punish those responsible, restructure the government. The Venetian Senate debated. A few voices pointed out that the lagoon had stopped invaders before, but the arsenal could no longer produce a fleet. The fortifications were crumbling. The treasury was exhausted. On May 12, 1797, the Great Council met for the last time. The chamber was the largest room in the Doge's palace, lined with paintings by Tintoretto and Veronese, its ceiling covered in gilded panels. Along the upper walls ran the portrait frieze of every Doge, an unbroken sequence of faces stretching back to the foundation of the office. In one spot, a black cloth hung where Marine Falliro's portrait should have been, still bearing the inscription placed there 442 years earlier. Of the approximately 1,000 nobles eligible to sit in the Great Council, only 537 came. The quorum for a valid vote was 600. They did not have it. They voted anyway. The motion was to dissolve the Republic of Venice. The vote was 512 in favor, 30 against, 5 abstentions. The Republic that had endured for over 1,000 years was abolished by a body that lacked the legal authority to make the decision. During the vote, gunfire was heard outside, Slavic troops in Venetian service firing their weapons in frustration or farewell. Inside the chamber, several councillors thought French troops were storming the palace. They were not. The shots faded. The vote was recorded. Doge Ludovico Manin sat through the proceedings in silence. He was the 120th Doge, elected 8 years earlier. When the vote was announced, he stood, removed the corno, the stiff, horn-shaped ducal cap, and handed it to his valet. He said, "Take it. I will not be needing it again." He removed the ducal robes and placed them on a chair. Underneath, he wore the simple clothes of a private citizen. He had dressed for this outcome. 3 days later, on May 15, Manin walked out of the Doge Palace for the last time. On May 16, French troops entered the Piazza San Marco. They looked up at the facade of St. Mark's Basilica. There, above the main entrance, stood the 4 bronze horses, the same horses Dandolo's men had taken from Constantinople in 1204. The French took them down, crated them, and shipped them to Paris. The horses that Venice had stolen from Constantinople were stolen from Venice. The arsenal was seized. Its remaining ships were taken or burned. The Bucentoro was stripped of its gilt and broken up for timber. The mouths of the lion were sealed. The Council of 10 was disbanded. The 10-round electoral system, the lotteries, the committees, the silver urn, the child from the street, was abolished in a single afternoon. The treasury of San Marco was emptied. Gold reliquaries, jeweled crosses, enameled icons, accumulated over centuries, were catalogued, crated, and removed. In the ghetto, the small island district where Venice had confined its Jewish population since 1516, giving the world the word itself, the gates were torn down. For the first time in nearly 3 centuries, the residents could leave at night without permission. Ludovico Manin lived for another 5 years. Venice was traded between France and Austria in the Treaty of Campo Formio. Manin died on October 24, 2002, buried without state honors, without a ducal funeral. There was no successor. The silver urn was in a warehouse. The corno was in a drawer. What remained was the city itself. The canals still moved with the tide. The basilica still held the bones of the stolen saint beneath its altar. The mosaics still shimmered with gold from Constantinople. The glassmakers on Murano still fired their furnaces, though the death penalty for leaving no longer applied. In the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, a stone slab on the upper gallery floor still bore the name of Enrico Dandolo, the blind doge who had sacked the city and been buried in its greatest building. His bones were long gone, but the name was still legible. On the Merceria, a small stone relief was set into a wall, the face of Giustina Rossi, who had dropped a mortar from her window and changed the course of a rebellion. Her rent had been frozen for 487 years. The freeze ended the same day as everything else. In the great council hall, the black cloth still hung in the portrait frieze, Faliero's empty space, the reminder that the Republic had once beheaded its own head of state. And on the facade of the basilica, 4 empty brackets stood where the bronze horses had been. The horses were in Paris. The sky showed through where copper muscle and mane had been for 600 years. 1,000 years earlier, refugees with nothing had waded into a lagoon and driven wooden stakes into the mud because there was no other place to go. They harvested salt, they built boats, they stole a saint and called it destiny, they married the sea and meant it. They sent a blind old man to sack the richest city in Christendom and mounted his trophies on their church. They built an arsenal that could produce a warship in a day and a glass furnace that could produce a miracle in a minute. They invented quarantine and espionage and an electoral system so complex it took 10 rounds and a child's hand to complete. They beheaded their own leader on the steps of his own palace and hung a black cloth where his face should have been. They made the most improbable city in the world on the most impossible ground and held it for 1,000 years. And when it ended, not with a siege, not with a battle, but with a vote that did not even reach quorum, the last Doge took off his hat, folded his robes, and walked out into a city that still stood exactly as it had always stood, on wooden pilings driven into mud, surrounded by water, going nowhere.